Domestic violence is a huge issue in society. It always has been, it always will be. A lot of it can be attributed to the second-class status that women have, I guess you would say, enjoyed or lived under our society throughout the generations and the millennia. The fact that they've been viewed as inferior members of the species, what have you. Well, I don't think anybody denies this. That women on so many different levels have been treated as second-class citizens and, have been victims throughout history of domestic violence. And, it's troubling and it's concerning because to me, there's always a better way to handle an issue than violence. I'm a pacifist by nature. I don't really like violence, don't choose to partake in violence. Actually, other than some forms of entertainment, really don't like it at all. So it bothers me when I see people get involved in these type of domestic situations where it resorts to this level because to me it's just sad and it's tragic, but it's a reality. But what else I don't like is the kind of man-hating narrative that comes out of any topic or discussion pertaining to domestic violence. I think this is where our society as a whole has a very flawed view of domestic violence and what it actually is and what actually happens. The typical narrative and even the flawed statistics that back it up indicate that far more often it's the man that's the aggressor and it's the man that's the primary and oftentimes sole abuser. And I've always disputed this notion. I've always disputed these facts because it comes down to how society itself views domestic violence. And there is a difference, and there is a double standard, and there is an inequality. And ironically enough, in a certain way, the beneficiary of that narrative are women. Not beneficiaries from the standpoint of the beatings they sometimes receive, no. But beneficiaries of the way society views, let's say, woman-on-man violence versus man-on-woman violence. Because I'll tell you this much. If I went out in public with my girlfriend Ashley, and let's say we go into the middle of a mall, and we decide to do this. I smack her once with an open hand. What do you think the reaction is going to be? People are going to be coming at me. They're going to be attacking me. They're going to be calling me all types of names. They're going to want to fight me. I'm going to have a huge problem on my hands. And that's good. That's fine. That's what should happen. That's the type of result that should occur. That's the reaction that people should have because that's not okay and should not be tolerated in our society. But if we then sat there and came back a couple hours later, let's say, and I told her to wail on me with closed fists 10 or 12 times, what's the reaction going to be? People are going to laugh. They're going to talk about how this cracker's getting his ass whooped. People are going to be pulling out their cell phones and taking pictures. There's not going to be anybody running up to want to fight her or threaten her or talk to her or try to break it up. People are going to enjoy it. They're going to stand back because it's different. Because, man, I must have earned it. I must have deserved it. And I've got what's coming to me because if she's this mad, that's the only way it can be justifiable. And we know this is how society views it when it comes to the different roles that males and females take when it comes to domestic violence. Why is a slap viewed as an acceptable punishment for a woman to bestow upon a man, but if a man does it, it's abuse? That makes absolutely no fucking sense, and there is no good defense for that. And don't just sit there and give me, well, the man is stronger, and therefore the man could cause more damage. Oh, now we're going to sit there and say that there is an inequality, that men are stronger than women, but so many other times we sit there and talk about it, and we'll say, women can do everything a man can do, and da-da-da-da-da. It's got to be consistent across the board, not this pick and choose bullshit. Equality is equality at all times in all situations, not just when it's convenient for you or your belief or your narrative that you are attempting to cultivate and build. When women slap men, they deserve the same type of condemnation and scorn that a man slapping a woman in public would get, period. And to argue otherwise is foolish. And when we talk about the statistics, how many guys don't report domestic violence instances, don't report the abuse that they suffer from their women, or let's even say their same-sex partner man, because of the shame that comes with being a guy in that type of situation, with the type of public scorn they would get and the looks that they would get and the way it's viewed as a society. You don't see battered men's shelters, do you? Just think about that for a second. No, when it comes down to the whole NFL thing and the outrage over people like Ray Rice and Adrian Peterson and Ray McDonald and so on and so forth, there should be outrage. There should be anger. Because that's terrible, especially in the case of a Ray Rice. But even throughout that whole process, in order to have a real legitimate discussion about domestic violence and attempt to solve an issue, we must get away from the solely man-hating narrative that comes along with domestic violence and domestic abuse issues. At no point in time did anybody bring up the fact, it seemed like, that Janae Rice was actually the one that hit Ray Rice first. That does not excuse or justify what Ray Rice did in any way, shape, or form. But that also doesn't make him the only person that was a party to domestic violence or was the only perpetrator of domestic violence. And that does not make Janae Rice the only victim of domestic violence. If she gets in his face and hits him first, then he has become abused himself. He is a victim of domestic violence as well, the same as her, regardless of what the videotape may show. The result might have been much worse for her, I grant you. And what he did was despicable as a man and as a human being, and I will never fight that or dispute that. But what has made me sick about it is when people will sit there and ignore certain evidence and ignore certain key components that make up the domestic violence puzzle. And yes, sometimes as uncomfortable as this is for women to hear and men that have been programmed by women and by society to believe this man-hating domestic violence narrative, women sometimes create their own problems because in a lot of ways they are the primary abusers. Just because it doesn't get reported, just because it's not reflected in statistics, doesn't mean it doesn't fucking happen. How many times does a guy get pushed repeatedly and nothing happens? He doesn't do anything. How many times does a guy get slapped or hit in the chest or hit in the face and he doesn't do anything? And those incidents don't go reported. But yet a woman continues to do that. Now, again, in order for us to have a real discussion about domestic violence and attempt to solve anything, we have to be completely open and honest with what domestic violence and domestic abuse really is, and what actually goes on. And for this whole woman victimization and man guiltization, it doesn't paint a full picture by any stretch of the imagination. It's very misleading and it's a false narrative, then this bullshit must stop. And you can look at the news and see this narrative, and you can see how different it is when a woman is accused of abuse as opposed to a man. And you look at what happened with Brittney Griner and her partner Glory Johnson, and this is a perfect example of this. Now, I grant you, and most people in this country don't give two flying fucks about women's sports. I understand that. I get that. That's what they want to do. That's fine. And I also understand that this isn't the same type of buzzworthy thing because it's the WNBA as opposed to the NBA, or most especially the NFL. So for a sensationalistic, money ratings-driven sports media, they're not going to think, no matter how good or bad a story about the WNBA, it's not going to carry the same type of legs as a similar type of story involving the NFL or the NBA. And that's also very true. And what's also very true is talking about something like what happened between Brittney Griner and Glory Johnson does not fit into the man-hating domestic violence narrative that has been so perpetuated throughout society. And therefore, as a result, it makes people, I think, somewhat uncomfortable to talk about it, so it largely doesn't get talked about. And I think this is also true. I don't know if it has anything to do with the fact that it was two women involved, and people don't really want to bring light to that. I don't know what the case is. But the bottom line is, it leaves me wondering, where is the outrage for Brittney Griner and Glory Johnson in all of this? Where's the anger? Where's the public scorn? Where's the outrage? It's not there. And I'm not surprised. Again, it could go into some of those things that we talked about before, but at the end of the day, the biggest thing is it's because it's one woman hitting another. And it's that simple. You can talk about the fact that it's the WNBA and it's women's sports, it's women's athletes, people don't give a fuck. But no, if people are so pissed off about domestic violence and domestic abuse, and this is such an important thing, then where the fuck is the outrage over Brittney Griner and Glory Johnson and what they did to each other? It's non-existent. People aren't talking about it. And imagine that. The women's groups and other domestic rights groups are largely silent about this because it doesn't fit into the certain preconceived notions and propaganda that we have in our society when it comes to domestic violence. We don't want to talk about women actually abusing other individuals, especially other women. And what's really gross about this is the fact that the WNBA has been allowed to skirt on this issue. They haven't been called to task basically by any fucking body that matters. This has gotten no coverage. This has gotten no press. And this is completely and totally ridiculous. Brittney Griner has already copped a plea. I believe Glory Johnson may have as well. Either way, it's already acknowledged that something bad happened. Brittney Griner has acknowledged that something bad happened and it wasn't okay. But where's the WNBA? Twiddling their fingers. Crickets can be heard coming out of the WNBA offices. And what's particularly sickening about this is for a league whose fan base is predominantly women and kids. For them to be silent on this makes me sick to my stomach. How much do you want to bet if Brittney Griner wasn't gay and she was the one that was hit by a guy, then all of a sudden the fucking WNBA would have their figurative panties and sports bras in a fucking bunch wanting to hang the damn dude. Everybody would talk about how gross this is and how sick this is and how much he should pay and how evil of an individual he is. But yet, when it's a woman and she sits there and beats on another woman, nobody says a damn thing. Everybody's silent. It is bullshit. Period. Shame on ESPN and all the sports media for fucking ignoring this. Shame on the WNBA for not being called out on this. Shame on the the WNBA for not acting on this. Brittney Griner and Glory Johnson did something, and they deserve to be punished for it. They deserve to face the judgment of the league, and they deserve to face the consequences for their actions. And the WNBA, I keep wanting to say WWE almost, the WNBA deserves to pay as well. They should be criticized to kingdom fucking come. They should be called out for their lack of action. They should be called out for the fact that they are basically excusing domestic violence because it involves one of their biggest stars in the damn league. The bottom line is domestic violence isn't okay. And it's not acceptable. Whether it's a man on a woman, it's a woman on a man, it's a man on a man, it's a woman on a woman. It's sickening and this type of shit must stop. There are better ways to handle our problems and issues in society. But there are also better ways to help affect those type of positive changes. And one way to do that is by not ignoring a clear-cut case of domestic violence. We can sit there and talk about deflated fucking footballs to kingdom come, but we've got one of the biggest stars and well-known names, if there is such a thing in the WNBA, beating the shit basically out of her partner, and nobody says anything. ESPN, quiet. Rest of the sports media, nothing. So many of these groups that were all in a fuss and a tizzy when it came to Ray Rice are eerily fucking silent. The WNBA has done nothing. And nobody has called out the WNBA for their bullshit in this case. Fucking imagine that. It just shows you the hypocrisy and the double standards in our society when it comes to domestic violence. Brittney Griner should be suspended at least half, if not a full, WNBA season. And the fact that I believe she has yet to face any type of punishment and the WNBA is dragging their feet on this makes me absolutely sick to my fucking stomach. But what makes me even more sick to my stomach is the fact that the national sports media has been largely quiet on this issue. So many of these domestic violence groups have been largely quiet on this issue, and many people probably don't even know about this issue because, again, it hasn't been covered like it's a real issue. It is! We can sit there and talk about Kingdom Come with fucking Ray Rice. We can do the same damn thing with Brittney Griner. And there's only one reason we don't. I hope by now I've explained what that reason is.